Welcome to the Iranian Republic. Today we are hosting Barbara Slavin, distinguished fellow at Stimson Center, and we're going to talk about the recent round of negotiations between the Islamic Republic and the Trump administration. Barbara, thanks for being here.
Sure, my pleasure.
It's so great that we have the opportunity to have you again. I remember it was almost a year ago where we were talking about the sanctions and their impact on Iranian civil society and overall people, and how they have been able to kind of work or not work. And right now, these days, I think the hot topic is negotiations between the Trump administration and the Islamic Republic. And I'm glad we were able to have you. And tell us a little bit about like the latest things that you have learned, and things that you have from different sources about the negotiations, and what are your thoughts on that? We'd love to hear that.
Sure. Pleasure to be with you again. It's hard, obviously, for us to know the details of the negotiations, but as we speak, they're about to have their fourth meeting. And it appears that they are getting into substantive issues. I mean, basically, it's a trade-off between rolling back the nuclear program and putting verifiable curbs on that program and sanctions relief. And the Iranians are looking for durable sanctions relief. I think they have some feeling that Donald Trump can accomplish this in a way that Democratic presidents have not been able to do. And so the question is, what are they willing to give up in return? And we have seen, of course, pressure coming from some in the United States, certainly from the government of Israel, for the so-called Libya model, which would be a complete dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program. And we've seen a lot of pushback from Iran suggesting that that is just not going to work. And my own personal view is that the Libya model is inappropriate for Iran. I remember when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program. He didn't have a program. He had a bunch of unassembled centrifuges sitting in crates. He didn't have nuclear scientists who even knew how to put them together. He had bought these centrifuge parts from the Pakistanis, from a man named A.Q. Khan, who the world's greatest proliferator of nuclear materials. And he had a rudimentary chemical weapons program as well, but he did not have what Iran has, which is a program that dates back to 1957, that began under the Shah, that includes hundreds of Iranian scientists and engineers, some of them trained in the United States at MIT and Stanford and Caltech, who know very well how to operate both a civilian nuclear program and a military one if the decision were made to go in that direction. So to ask Iran to adopt a Libya model is a non-starter. The question is, how much will Iran give up, and how verifiable will these curbs be? Will Iran really open up to the International Atomic Energy Agency in a major way, allow all kinds of scrutiny, readopt and approve through Parliament the additional protocol of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, really establish confidence that it will not make weapons and that it will not do this forever, or at least for as long as most of us are going to be around. And I think these are the kinds of things that they're trying to hash out in the talks. And we'll see if they manage to reach an agreement.
So you think that Trump's administration would be okay with allowing Iran to have at least some sort of civilian, non-military enrichment levels, like three and
Well,
3%?
Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has already said that the U.S. is okay with Iran continuing to have a civilian nuclear program. Iran, of course, has reactors at Bushehr that produce energy for electricity. What he hasn't said is that Iran can continue to enrich uranium domestically. And so I think that's the real sticking point. And I frankly don't know how they're going to overcome this difference, whether there are guarantees that Iran can provide that would provide sufficient confidence that it would not enrich to high levels, that it would go back to the 3.67% purity.
But
You
even
know,
that, Rubio said we're not going to
you know,
allow it, right?
well, there are some who reject this. We don't quite know what Steve Witkoff,
Exactly.
the Uber negotiator for the Trump administration, I mean, he has said contradictory things. He said he accepts it, and then he's backed off from that. So we really don't know what the final position is, and I think a lot depends on other factors. Now, there's a new wrinkle, which is that the Iranians are offering the United States the opportunity to invest in Iran's nuclear industry, which is not something they've ever offered before,
Hmm.
suggesting that if the US were sort of on the ground in Iran's nuclear facilities, that would provide confidence that these facilities could not be diverted to military uses. I mean, this would be an amazing breakthrough in U.S. Iran relations. I mean, it would almost have to entail normalization of diplomatic relations, an end of the U.S. primary embargo on Iran. I mean, a vast change in the nature of the U.S. Iran relationship that would be extremely dramatic and controversial, not just in this country, but in Iran, where Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has said death to America for, however many years, and rejected this kind of cooperation with the United States. So, with Trump, everything seems to be somehow in play, but then I have these fundamental doubts that he has the persistence and the competence to actually reach any kind of agreement, be it limited or radical. But it's all out there and it's all in play.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of get into the topic of Witkoff versus like Rubio. What's going on in there? Who's the real Secretary of State, and who's in charge of the negotiations?
Beats me. I mean, obviously, Trump has a lot of confidence in Steve Witkoff. But Steve Witkoff doesn't know very much about Iran. I mean, he's obviously learning now, and he certainly doesn't know much about nuclear issues. So, who's advising him? Now, the Trump administration has appointed the head of the State Department's policy planning department, a guy named Michael Anton, to head the technical talks. And Michael Anton doesn't know very much about nuclear issues, as far as I know. So I don't know, who are the mid-level State Department, Energy Department people who are on his team who are telling him what a centrifuge is and what it does. Um, you know, uh, who were explaining the problems that the IAEA has had with Iran in terms of transparency of the program over the years. There are still aspects of Iran's nuclear activities that Iran has never accounted for, like traces of uranium, enriched uranium found at various sites. How open will Iran be? One positive factor is that I think the IAEA is playing an even bigger role this time in the negotiations than back in 2013, 14, 15, when you had, large teams like 100 Americans were backing up the negotiations for the JCPOA. Now I think the IAEA is doing a lot of the backstopping, and I was at an event recently with Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, and he seemed fairly confident that there was sufficient technical expertise to back up these talks. And I got the impression that the IAEA was providing a lot of that expertise. After all, they're the ones who've been monitoring the Iranian program for all these years. So, I know that Grossi would certainly want to see a deal that would allow the IAEA back into Iran in a massive way to not only fill in gaps in knowledge about what Iran's been up to over the last few years, but maybe resolve some of these old issues that Iran has never been willing to do.
Gotcha. And then, speaking of like the time aspect of it, we know that JCPOA was supposed to kind of expire this year, but you mentioned that they want something that's permanent, or as long as we're gonna be
As
alive.
long as possible, certainly without the sunsets that the JCPOA had. Yeah, in October, the UN resolution that enshrined the JCPOA expires. And when that expires, the possibility of snapping back UN sanctions on Iran also expires. This was a provision of the JCPOA. It was supposed to be a way of preventing Iran from cheating. Of course, it never anticipated that the US would withdraw from the deal unilaterally, which it did in 2018 under the first Trump administration. So the US is no longer party to the JCPOA. It can't snap back the sanctions, but Britain or France could do so because they are permanent members of the UN Security Council. And it's been interesting. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has been reaching out to the Europeans. He wants consultations with them. He wants to get their agreement not to snap back sanctions before October to give the negotiating process more time, even though the Europeans are not party to the negotiations. I mean, this is bilateral now. It's U.S. Iran, which it wasn't, back 10 years ago.
Correct. And then, speaking of the European part, so this time, first of all, so there's a deadline like set by Trump for 60 days, right? And then,
October, oh, Trump has set a deadline. I mean, as long as they're talking, I think we're okay. It's if the talks break up that I would be worried about, Trump actually carrying out threats to carry out military action against Iran.
okay. And then, do you have the snapback that the ability to have,
October,
you know,
yeah.
is going to be in October? How much time Europeans need to have the snapback? And is it like something you can do instantly, or it's going to take some time?
No, it takes time, and they would basically have to start the process this summer. And I think Russia will be chairing the Security Council in October, which might also make it a little bit difficult, since the Russians do not want to see those sanctions snap back on Iran. I should add that the Russians and the Chinese, I think, are both urging the Iranians to make a deal. Neither country wants Iran to join the nuclear club. And I think particularly for the Chinese, if sanctions could be eased, that would make it easier for them to invest in Iran. And I think the Chinese are focused very much on stability in the region, not any further threats to stability, which are already severe given what's going on in Gaza and in Syria and to a lesser extent Lebanon and so on.
Gotcha. And
Oh, the Houthis. Yeah, we left out Yemen.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get to like Russians and Chinese. This time we've seen a lot more activity, or at least it seemed like, from Iran to go talk to neighbors, talk to Russians, talk to Chinese, and kind of be aligned with them. What are your thoughts on the perspective of the Chinese and the Russians on the nuclear deal? You
Yeah.
mentioned that they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but what are the other concerns? I feel like China should probably is trying to say, peace is good for business. I want peace in this region. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, that's going to destabilize the region. If Iran gets sanctions, that's going to hurt my trade. What are your thoughts on the Chinese and the Russian perspective?
Yeah, well, they're not formally part of the talks this time. It was the P5+1.
Right.
10 years ago, it was the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany and Iran. But both Russia and China have become more important partners for Iran since the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA and reimposed sanctions. The Europeans basically fled the Iranian market, and Iran was left relying on China to buy its oil despite sanctions. And since 2022, when the Russians invaded Ukraine in a massive way, we've seen Russia and Iran develop a military alliance where Iran provides drones and other equipment to the Russians, and the Russians have increased their military cooperation with Iran and also their economic cooperation to a lesser extent. Their security cooperation has been there, I think, since 2009, since the Green Movement, when the Russians gave the IRGC all kinds of advice on how to crack down on civil society. So this relationship has gotten quite close. And so I think Iran also probably wants their advice. Trump is also trying to negotiate with Putin. And I think Putin and Lavrov, the foreign minister, have insights about Steve Witkoff, who's also their interlocutor on Ukraine and other issues. Putin understands Trump. He dealt with him before. And so I think they're looking for some guidance, perhaps, on how to appeal to Trump's vanity and encourage him to think that he's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize if he reaches a nuclear agreement with Iran. I mean, Trump is very transparent in terms of his psychological needs. So I think Putin, being the old spy master that he is gives very good advice on that. The Chinese have other kinds of expertise in terms of dealing with the U.S., in terms of dealing with sanctions, tariffs, what have you. And of course, China is Iran's most important trading partner. So again, I think it's very important that Iran keeps China and Russia on its side, and that it consults with them as it moves forward in this process with the United States.
Yeah, and so going back in history, like since the early 2000s, uh, it seemed like Iran or Islamic Republic always been trying to push forward this nuclear program, help it advance, and whenever there was an issue or there was a threat, they say, okay, we suspend uh, the enrichment, and then we start it again, and then we keep going, and then there's other sanctions. Okay, we're gonna reduce the percentage, and then keep going JCPOA. Okay, you guys pull out. Okay, we're gonna keep like increasing the enrichment levels to 60, 80% if we can, and then keep it at 60, and moving forward. And to me, it seemed like whenever there's pressure, they're gonna put a pause on it. They're gonna reduce the or limit the percentage of the enrichment, but then keep going, moving the program forward. And it seemed like the goal is to get to a place where Iran can build a nuclear weapon. Pretty
They
realistic.
are there. They're at that place. They've been at that place now for a while.
But
Yeah.
in terms of like being able to deliver the nuclear weapon as well, like reliably through an intercontinental ballistic missile, which doesn't seem like they have the ability, but they are very close to it. And to me, talking to Farzin Nadimi was, and that from his perspective was, they've always been trying to develop this. They have the missile program to deliver the nuclear weapon, and they have the enrichment program to put the fissile material
Mhm.
on the missile. And they have been this has been their playbook since ever. What do you think gonna happen this time? Are they gonna try to stall like negotiations, or just negotiate every week, forever, or
Uh,
is it gonna
yeah,
be something that's gonna have a clear deadline? They're gonna stop, and or what are
yeah.
your thoughts on the
I think they're ambivalent. I think we all know the Iranian economy is in terrible shape, and Iran's regional alliances have been shredded since the Hamas attacks on Israel of 2023. So on the one hand, they need a deal, but Iran is Iran, and they're not going to take any deal. So if it means giving up enrichment entirely, I don't think they'll do it. In that case, I think they would stall and try to somehow push this past October and past snapback. But it is a risk. They have to factor in a number of things. Trump uh, doesn't want a new war in the Middle East. I think that's pretty clear. He doesn't want to be dragged into a war by the Israelis, but he has threatened to attack Iran. And of course, the Israelis are perfectly capable of trying to drag the United States in, whether we like it or not. And if Netanyahu starts something, will the U.S. not move in at least to defend Israel in the event of an Iranian counterattack? uh, it would put Trump in a very awkward situation, given his support from Christian evangelicals who are more supportive of Israel than most American Jews are, frankly, these days. So it's a risky situation. I think the Iranians are sincere in trying to reach some sort of agreement. Again, the question is, where is the Venn diagram? Where is the overlap? Where both sides can say, we got enough of what we needed to make this a good deal, and something that can be defended domestically in both cases. I have my own ideas about what that overlap looks like. Everybody has their own
Yeah,
ideas,
tell us
but
more about that overlap. Yeah. What's that?
to my mind, Iran goes back to 3.67%. It ships out all the 60%. It removes advanced centrifuges. It stockpiles them somewhere. It allows the IAEA back in a significant way to scrutinize everything. It accounts for everything it's done over, the last 3 years in particular, since a lot of the cameras were turned off. Um, it it agrees to the additional protocol, ratifies that. It allows the IAEA to have the inspectors of its choice. They had blackballed some of them because they said they were spies for Mossad, whatever. Iran is riddled with Mossad spies anyway. I mean, it's kind of, useless to pretend they're not already there. It allows American inspectors to come in. It offers to work with the United States on some civilian aspects of its nuclear program. It takes other steps that make this easier to swallow regionally. It basically acknowledges that its regional alliances have been severely undercut, stops calling for death to America, stops calling for death to Israel, embraces a two-state solution to the Palestinian question, which is the international consensus. Probably pretty far-fetched at this point because the Israelis don't support a two-state solution, at least not this Israeli government. Basically stop acting like you're still a revolutionary rogue state after 46 years, and act in Iranian national interest instead of the interest of some global axis of, whatever resistance or something like that. Grow up, after 46 years. Is that possible? Is it possible to some extent? How much so? And would that allow the Trump administration to say, see, we've got a deal that is so much better than what Obama got or what Biden was trying to get? That's my optimal goal. I mean, I really want to see Iran stop acting like a rogue in the region and start, supporting constructive solutions to not just its own nuclear problem, but regional conflicts more broadly. And it has people who are capable of doing that, but the supreme leader and those around him have to agree, and that's a big shift for them. And I just don't know if they're capable of it.
Yeah, I feel like whenever Islamic Republic, it comes to the existence of the Islamic, whenever there's existential threat, I think Islamic Republic bends pretty well all over these games.
Yeah. So is it existential now? That's the question. To what extent do they feel it is an existential threat? And I haven't been to Iran in a decade, so but my sense is that people there are so eager for economic relief, for social relief. They're tired of it. And does Khamenei is now 86. I mean, how does he want to be remembered? Does he want to be remembered as the Iranian leader who finally resolved the issues with the United States, or does he want to go down as as the hero of the resistance? You tell me.
Yeah, whatever works for him to stay in power, right? That's my feeling.
Well, he's 86. He's not going to be in power for much longer, no matter what. So,
Yeah,
the
maybe.
question is
Yeah,
what
maybe
happens
for
to Velayat Faki, what happens to the system, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I wanted to get to the second part, and what will Islamic Republic get in return? Like,
Yeah.
and then what will happen to sanctions that are not related to nuclear issues, related to human rights and related to other aspects of the activities of the Islamic Republic? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, Trump has essentially suggested he would put primary sanctions, on the table. He hasn't specified whether they're over terrorism or human rights or nuclear issues. I mean, we have thousands of sanctions against Iran. But he doesn't seem to be hung up on the notion that we have to sanction Iran forever. I don't think he likes sanctions, really, even though he uses them. Um, in terms of human rights, I'm afraid that he has no interest in that topic, and he's made that very clear. I mean, he is undermining America's human rights as we speak, deporting green card holders and even American citizen children to, he has no respect for the U.S. Constitution. So, I've had a uh, not an argument, but there's a debate, I mean, in the human rights community over whether one should even emphasize that when it comes to Iran, because it's clearly not something that Trump cares about. He doesn't care about it in Russia. He doesn't care about it in China. He doesn't care about it in Iran. So, it's important to me. My own feeling is that if there is an easing of economic pressure on Iran, that will help civil society. And conversely, if there's a military conflict, if the US and Israel attack Iran, I think that will be very detrimental to civil society, which is stirring again in Iran. I mean, we've already seen since Women Like Freedom that women in Iran are not wearing the hijab. I mean, I don't know how many clips you have to see on YouTube or Instagram or X where there are men and women together, dancing to rock bands, and the women aren't, they're not even wearing scarves around their necks anymore, the way they were the last time I was there. You are seeing people calling for Khamenei to resign, open letters that are being published on
They used to
various.
do that and then end up in prison, and they're still kind of.
They're doing it, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're arrested, sometimes they're not arrested. You're seeing a lot of people in civil society, saying we can't take this anymore. We have to change the system. We have to get rid of these red lines. Whether it's death to America, death to Israel, hijab, Council of Guardians. The thing about Iran is that it has the bones of a democracy. If you get rid of supreme leader, if you get rid of Council of Guardians, you have elected institutions. You have a habit of voting, for these institutions, whether they're city councils, parliament, president. And you could revitalize these
Yeah.
institutions so that people could actually choose who they want to govern themselves.
Make it a real
Uh,
democracy.
it's a country with what, 95% literacy? I mean, this is not some backward third world place that doesn't understand issues and doesn't debate. You have a press that is still remarkably lively, given given the repressive institutions in Iran. I mean, young journalists who risk arrest to write the truth, as those who covered women like freedom, and the death of Masa Amini, right?
Mhm.
So you have the bones of a
So the
democracy,
culture that can
more representative
incubate a
government.
democracy that is in Iran already. Like
Sorry?
so a culture that can incubate democracy or give rise and help us
But
change
you
the country.
also you also have other aspects that are anti-democratic, as we well know, and there is a minority of religious fanatics who will not give up without a fight.
Yeah.
So it is a very tense time in Iran, and how talks with the U.S. go could very strongly influence, I think, whether Iran continues this sort of one step forward, two steps back, two steps forward, three steps back kind of movement
Yeah.
toward a more representative government, or whether it goes from Khamenei to a military dictatorship, which is another possibility
And it,
that people have spoken about.
yeah.
Or it goes to back to a monarchy if Khamenei installs his son Mojtaba as the
Exactly.
next
Yeah.
supreme leader. In which case, 46 years for what? To go back to a monarchy? I don't think so.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the women life freedom movement, because that was like the power of people pushing back the government and government not being able to enforce its like job laws. And that was a big win for the Iranian people. I think that was a great example of Like Iranian government doesn't bend to power unless the power is like big enough or strong enough. Like if the
Yeah.
people want something, they can get it, and if they unite. And I wanted to kind of clarify that. So, do you think the human rights sanctions are on the table? They're going to be removed once they reach like a security deal, and a nuclear deal?
No, and they don't, they don't have to be removed because the human rights sanctions are largely against individuals. So they're against prosecutors, judges, people in the IRGC, in the Basij, people who personally took part in executions, torture. Those don't, they should stay, frankly. I don't see any reason to remove them. But are you going to remove the sanctions on the oil industry? Are you going to remove the sanctions on the central bank? I mean, that's what will allow Iran's economy to breathe again. It will actually undercut the sanctions mafia, which has grown up in Iran, which has benefited from all of these restrictions because these are the black marketeers who monopolize control over hard currency, who are doing most of the deals on oil and other crucial exports and imports. If you lift those sanctions, you open up the system to private enterprise again, and to ordinary people. So I think sanctions have failed in terms of accomplishing their goals. They haven't stopped the Iranian nuclear program. In fact, it's more advanced. They haven't made Iran a more open and democratic system. You still have the Valiat Feki, you still have the IRGC and all of the repressive organs. They've just made the Iranian people a lot poorer and more miserable. And given the illusion to congressmen and whatnot in this country that they've done something on Iran, right?
Right.
But
And they, they were
what have
doing
they really achieved?
right. And then, I wanted to at the end of our conversation kind of analyze two different scenarios. And first, reaching a deal between Trump administration and Islamic Republic, and then how that's going to impact civil society. And second, there's going to be a military conflict and how that's going to impact civil society. I'd love to know your thoughts on these two different
Yeah,
scenarios.
well, anybody who's listened to me or read my stuff over the last 20 odd years, longer even, knows that I don't support military strikes. I just, when you hit a country and whatever they say, these would not be surgical. I mean, people would die. A lot of people would die. Um, and of course, Iran would have to retaliate against American forces in the region, which means Americans would die again in battles in this part of the world. When you attack a country, people tend to coalesce, however unpopular their government. We saw it during the Iran-Iraq War, and I think we would see it again. Iranians would come together and basically say, "How dare you? How dare you attack us again and kill people again?" And I think it would strengthen the regime.
I
Um,
agree.
and it would give it a new lease on life, which is the last thing we want to do. Conversely, if there's a deal, I think it would give people, some economic room to breathe, and that would enable them to be even more involved in civil society. Right now, it's very, very risky to go out on strike because, how are you going to support your family? How are you going to live? As it is, more than a third of Iranian society is below the poverty line now. People don't eat meat. They're living on beans and rice and cucumbers if they're lucky. So it's a very tough situation that people are in. So I tend to support some sort of negotiated deal. Will it be perfect? Of course not. Will it be foolproof? Of course not. But when the Obama administration negotiated the JCPOA, they had this sense that it would lead to better things in Iranian society over time, and a diminution of Iran's hostility toward the West. And we'll never know because that experiment was cut short when Trump withdrew. We have another opportunity now, and one other factor that we haven't mentioned, and that is that the Arab countries now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, uh, Qatar certainly, are supportive of a deal with Iran. Because if there's a war, they are going to suffer. The Iranian retaliation will come against their facilities where Americans are based, oil installations in the Persian Gulf. Iraq would be very severely impacted. I was at a meeting recently with the Iraqi foreign minister, who's very, very worried about what it would mean for the Iraqi economy if the Persian Gulf was blocked off. If Basra was blockaded. So for multiple reasons, I mean, think what it would do to the American economy, which is already headed into a recession because of Trump's boneheaded tariffs and other measures. For every reason I can imagine, I don't want a war.
I see. And then in the second scenario where there's a deal,
Yeah.
what are the odds and chances of seeing a Chinese model happening in Iran, like IRGC, supreme leader, holding a tight grip on economy, saying, okay, these sanctions are relief, but we're not gonna let the private sector to take over. We're gonna just give it to our own people and our own mafia, and then. But we know that the military action would have catastrophic consequences. That's not good. But there's at least a chance when there's a deal. There's at least a chance for civil society to deactivate it. Is that the right assessment?
It's my sense. And also, I remember during the run up to the JCPOA, Iran has a rather developed private sector, at least it did. And I think that there are a lot of entrepreneurs, some of them have left the country, maybe they would come back and invest. There was a spurt of investment in things like, computer, tech startups and so on that we saw in the run up to the JCPOA. In the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, you have massive numbers of Iranian expats who still have connections to Iran, would be willing to do things to help out. So I don't think, Iran is not China. As I mentioned, the press in Iran is much freer than in China, for example. There are factions in Iran, political factions. China is a one-party dictatorship. And a rather personal dictatorship now under Xi Jinping. Iran, under the supreme leader, is more of an oligarchy than it is a one-man show. I mean, he needs support from various factions and groups within the society, be it Shia clerics or IRGC or sanctions mafia, whatever. So I think Iran is more pluralistic by nature, more factional. And a deal would enable some of these forces. Obviously, there would be efforts by the sanctions mafia to monopolize, but I think they would have some competition, which they don't have now.
Yeah, which is at least gives a chance to the civil society.
Yeah.
Better than zero. Yeah.
Better than zero. And the diaspora, of course, is very important in this because there would be strong support from the diaspora for civil society in Iran. There has been historically, and we would see more of that, I think, if sanctions were eased. And right now, for example, I publish articles by Iranian journalists and think tankers and academics. I can't pay them. Legally, I'm supposed to be able to pay them. There is a license for this at the Treasury Department, but there is no practical means to pay Iranians in Iran because no American bank will touch transactions. And if you try to pay them through Turkish banks, the Turkish banks take something like 40%, as a fee to pay an Iranian with an account in Turkey. So, this is crazy. How can you support civil society if you can't even transfer money legally for a good purpose to Iranians? So maybe some of that would finally be eased and we would be able to support people in Iran who deserve support.
Exactly. And any final thoughts? I remember you wanted to talk about civil society. If there's anything you want to expand on or any.
Yeah, no, I think I already mentioned, that I feel that it's stirring again. There were, big demonstrations demanding the end of house arrest for the Green Movement leaders. And I believe Mehdi Karoubi was freed from house arrest a couple of months ago. And they're talking about Musavi as well and his wife, and you know, these things are, yeah, the reform movement, who, people have lost faith in it, but they're important symbolically to show that Iran can be pluralistic, and that, people can be uh, pardoned for their support of free elections in the country, or even semi-free elections in the country. And I think that these are all good tendencies, and they're things we should support. And a reduction in tension between the U.S. and Iran would help.
Got it. And in case of Charubi, just comes to my mind that it's interesting that he backed down completely from the claims of the 2009. He was like, no, the origin of the issues was like 4 years before that, stuff like that. And it seemed like he's like, I was wrong, I'm out. And but
Well,
we'll
everybody
obviously,
knows those elections were fraudulent. I mean, yeah.
but
It's like Trump. Trump claims he won the 2020 elections. Anybody with half a brain knows he didn't.
mhm,
So, the Islamic Republic can't admit that Ahmadinejad deserved to lose. Okay. We all know different.
yeah, yeah.
They know
Hopefully,
different too.
yeah. But then I feel like the common hope, as you will, if you will, is civil society grows and becomes stronger and stronger, and hopefully we have the chance to transition to democracy after so many years of beginning from the constitutional monarchy movement almost
Yeah.
100 years ago, and all the way to this struggle of Iranians to get into a democratic society, establish
It's more
democratic
than
society.
100 years now.
Yeah, yeah,
It's 120 years. So Iran was the first country in the Middle East to have a parliament, an elected parliament. And we should not forget that. Iran was always in the vanguard. And then, it had multiple setbacks, be they coups or revolutions that didn't fulfill their promise. So it's past time for that to happen in Iran.
exactly. Thank you so much, Barbara. I really enjoyed our talk, learned a lot. This was